Hi, my name is Karen Kolbe, and I'm coming to you today as Mother Goose. I'm bringing my friend Feathers. Feathers really likes to listen to poems and children's stories. I hope you will too. I certainly like to read them. The story I'm reading today is called Rude Mule. Let's see what's going on with the rude mule. What would you do if a mule knocked on your door one day and said, "I've come for lunch"? You'd say, "Hello, come in, mule." Would you do that, boys and girls? What if he came in and sat down at the table? You'd say, "Mule, wash your hoofs before lunch." But what if he said, "Won't"? You'd say, "No lunch for you then." What if he brayed a rude mule hee-haw? You'd ignore him until he stopped. Hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw. You'd wait until he stopped, wouldn't you? What if he got tired of making a fuss and washed his hooves under the top politely? You'd say, "Would you like some spaghetti?" What if he just said, "Okay"? You'd say, "Mule, please say, 'Yes, please.'" But what if he said, "Won't"? You'd say, "No spaghetti for you then." What if he brayed a rude mule hee-haw and stomped his 4 stubborn hooves? You'd ignore him until he stopped, wouldn't you? He was really making a fuss. What if he got tired of making a fuss and said, "Yes, please," very politely? You'd serve him some spaghetti, wouldn't you? And what if he began to slurp and gobble? You'd say, "Mule, eat your food quietly." But what if he said, "Won't"? You'd say, "Well, then we won't be able to play with my train set after lunch." What if he brayed a rude mule hee-haw and stamped his 4 stubborn hooves and blew a loud "bah" out of his mule nose? You'd ignore him until he stopped, wouldn't you? Because that is not polite. What if he got tired of making a fuss and began to eat quietly? You'd say, "When we play with my train set, you can be the driver." But what if he got very excited and jumped down from his chair? You'd say, "Mule, ask please, may I leave the table?" What if he said, "Won't"? Then you'd say, "Then my train set will have to do without a driver today." What if he brayed a rude mule hee-haw and stomped his 4 stubborn hooves and blew a loud noise out of his mule mouth and poked out his red mule tongue? You'd ignore him until he stopped, wouldn't you? What if he got tired of making a fuss and said, "Please, may I leave the table?" very politely? Then Mule would get to drive the train. And then you'd play hide and seek, and then you'd blow bubbles, and you'd both have a wonderful time until you were both tired. What if he said, "I'm going home now," and got ready to leave? You'd say, "Mule, what should you say now?" What if he blinked his bright mule eyes and wrinkled his mule forehead and thought and thought? Then what if he smiled a big toothy smile and said very politely, "Thank you for having me. I had a lovely time." You'd say, "Come again tomorrow, and we'll paddle in my wading pool." Then he'd bray a happy mule hee-haw and clap his mule hoofs and blow a quiet plah down his mule nose and lick you gently with his red mule tongue and give you a giant mule hug. Then you'd wave goodbye to him very politely, and you'd go get your wading pool ready, wouldn't you? We have to remember all those things, don't we, boys and girls? We're not mules, obviously, but if we go to somebody's house, we have to be polite. We have to wash our hands before we eat. We have to eat politely. We can't slurp and gobble. We have to eat politely. We have to say thank you if someone gives us something. We have to be very, very polite, because if we're polite when we're at somebody's house, then the chance would be good that somebody would invite us to come back and play again. And we'd like that, wouldn't we, boys and girls? After we finished playing, we'd say, "Thank you very much for having me." And they'd know that you're a polite little boy or girl, and they'd want you to come back to their house to play. But they wouldn't want you to if you weren't polite. Mule and his friend got along fine. And even though he fussed and did things like make noises and wrinkle up his forehead and stick out his tongue, those are all things that we don't do. But his friend waited until he calmed down, and then they could play together nicely, or then they could eat together nicely, and the mule could visit, and they had a wonderful time. You have to remember that whether you're at your house or if you go to someone else's house to play. You have to be polite. And if you're polite and play nicely, then chances would be really good that they'd invite you over again